The morning begins in the village square, where a young boy lunges forward with a wooden branch, loudly proclaiming his status as a wizard while striking his playmate. The girl, cast in the role of a monster, objects to the physical force of the blow, crying out in pain and arguing that even in their games, the rules of roleplay shouldn't involve getting hit for real. Their bickering is silenced by the arrival of Grandpa Rebus, who chuckles at their early morning energy. When the kids eagerly ask what they need to do to become real wizards, the elder drops a heavy truth. He explains that wizards are the absolute apex of humanity, elite rulers who occupy the highest hierarchies of society. They are nobles and knights who didn't just study magic, but inherited the ability to use mysterious powers from their ancient ancestors. With a sympathetic look, he tells the children that, unfortunately, they simply can't become wizards just because they want to. The light-hearted atmosphere evaporates as a villager approaches Rebus to ask if the terrifying rumors are true. With a grim expression, the elder confirms that a monster has indeed appeared. It was spotted at the village entrance the night before, a leopard as big as a house, its entire body covered in a pitch-black shadow. While the village chief has already departed for the city to request a professional wizard for help, the adults remain on edge. The children are sternly warned to stay out of the forest, as the village guards know all too well that for ordinary people, killing a monster of that magnitude is a literal impossibility. Rebus looks away from the crowd, his thoughts turning to the outskirts of the village as he asks about the shepherd currently tending his flock on Hisril Hill. High above the village, we find Turan, the shepherd in question, lying flat in the grass and staring blankly at the sky. Turan is the picture of burnout, complaining that his life has become a loop of the same boring scenery and the same routine every single day. He's been isolated for so long that he jokes about eventually forgetting how to hold a conversation entirely. His solitude is broken by Rebus, who finds him neglecting his duties and calls him a pathetic brat for slacking off before the sun has even started to set. Turan doesn't even look up, simply telling the old man to move because he's blocking the sunlight. The tension between them is thick. Turan hasn't forgotten the time Rebus tried to claim his mother's sheep as shared village property after she passed away. He makes it clear he isn't generous enough to share his inheritance and tells the elder to say what he wants and get lost. Rebus is clearly offended by the boy's lack of manners, but he manages to deliver the warning about the shadow leopard. Rebus is baffled by Turan's lack of fear, pointing out that as a lone shepherd on the hill, he is the most likely target for a house-sized predator. He claims he only came out of concern, but Turan sees right through him, accusing the old man of only being worried about the safety of the livestock. Turan ends the conversation with a sharp insult about the elder's breath being bad enough to make his nose rot, and Rebus finally stomps away in a huff. Left alone with his sheep, Turan's gaze turns serious as he reflects on the nature of monsters, beasts that wield mysterious power and magic. He finds it interesting that a wizard might actually come to such a backwater village, giving him a chance to see one of the world's elite in person. He's skeptical that a wizard hired by a rural village chief will be anything special, but he's still curious to see just how strong they really are. However, his contemplation is cut short as the wind shifts. His relaxed expression vanishes as a heavy, metallic scent cuts through the breeze, unmistakably blood, and close. The sun begins to set over the dense forest as Turan follows the heavy, metallic scent of blood deeper into the trees. He's certain of the direction, tracking the iron-like aroma until he finally pushes through the brush to find exactly what he was looking for. There, lying motionless in a pool of blood, is Grandpa Rebus. Turan looks down at the body, noting the grim irony that the old man who spent all afternoon warning him to be careful was the first one to rush headlong into the danger. Examining the deep, jagged wounds, Turan realizes the situation is even worse than he thought. These aren't the marks an ordinary wild animal could make. The heavy air in the woods confirms his suspicion as a massive, hulking presence emerges from the shadows. It's a beast wreathed in dark energy with eyes that glow a predatory yellow, towering over him as it lets out a low growl. In the village, the stories about these monsters are the stuff of nightmares, where children are told they are insanely strong beings. Ordinary adults are warned that if they ever tried to rush a beast like this, they wouldn't even have enough bones left to collect. The only hope is the village chief bringing back a professional wizard to subjugate the threat. To the commoners, wizards are great beings born with the power of magic, capable of killing a monster with nothing more than a single word. Facing the beast alone, Turan decides to test that legendary theory for himself. He looks the creature in the eye and utters a cold, singular command, die. For a heartbeat, the monster pauses, but then it lets out a fierce growl as Turan's own red aura flares to life. He looks almost disappointed, muttering that the single word trick isn't working as intended. The beast lunges with a roar, its massive claws tearing through the air, but Turan doesn't flinch. Instead, he issues a new, authoritative command, stop. In a display of raw strength, Turan catches the house-sized predator with his bare hands, halting its massive momentum cold. As the creature struggles against his grip, Turan pushes back and decides it's time to stop playing around. He concludes that in a case like this, a shepherd should simply do what a shepherd does. He reaches down and scoops a mundane rock from the dirt, preparing to use his own specialized tools for the job. The monster recovers and lunges again, but Turan is already prepping his projectile. He imbues the stone with his power, whispering the command to harden as the rock begins to hum with energy. His eyes ignite with a sharp, golden glow as he prepares his throw, further empowering the rock with the command to become faster. With a final, decisive shout to pierce through, he releases the stone. The projectile tears through the air like a bolt of lightning, creating a streak of blue-white energy that obliterates the monster's shadow aura. Turan watches calmly as the stone strikes with the force of an explosion, tearing through the beast's neck and chest. He confirms that he is specifically aiming for the head to finish it off. The stone finds its mark with a deafening boom, obliterating the monster's head in a violent spray of blood and dark energy. Turan stands over the smoking remains, noting that this was his first time ever using his skills on a monster. Looking at the massive carcass, he grumbles about whether he should just toss it into a nearby valley to avoid the paperwork that he wipes the grime from his face, complaining that the village bastards always find a way to put him to work even during his time off. I am a wizard. As Turan stands in the silence, his thoughts drift back 8 years to when he was just 10 years old. That was the day he first realized he possessed special abilities. He remembers it vividly, logs and household items floating through the air of their small home as he experimented with his newfound strength. He had called out to his mother in excitement, showing her how the logs could fly and bragging that he could even manifest fire and wind. But his mother's reaction wasn't one of pride. "Stop it," she had screamed, marking the first and only time she ever lost her temper with him. She sat him down for a serious talk, her expression filled with a desperate kind of worry. She asked him if he wanted to stay by her side for a long time, and when he nodded, she made him swear a solemn oath. He had to promise never to use his power again, and especially never to use it in front of other people. When a young Turan asked why, she reminded him of the history of their world. She explained that while anyone with magic is labeled a wizard, there is a fundamental difference between the classes. Nobles are the direct descendants of a divine people known as the Freyans, while knights are the descendants of nobles whose blood eventually mixed with common humans. Turan's father had been a knight, and that was the source of his inherited power. His mother warned him that the world was full of cruel nobles who viewed knights as little more than slaves to be used and discarded. To protect his freedom, she insisted that nobody could ever know the truth. 8 years have passed since that promise was made, and Turan has never broken it. He has no interest in fame, no desire to reveal his magic, and certainly no intention of leaving his peaceful life on the mountain. However, his solitude is abruptly shattered by a violent pounding on his door. A voice bellows his name, ordering him to come outside immediately. Opening the door, Turan finds himself face to face with a mob of angry villagers. He simply yawns, looking more bored than threatened, and asks if they are seriously suggesting that he was the one who killed Grandpa Rebus. One of the men lunges forward and grabs him by the collar, calling him shameless and accusing him of hurting the elder before throwing him to the monsters to save himself. Turan remains calm, his eyes narrowing as he surveys the crowd. He quickly realizes exactly why they are trying to frame him, the village's oldest resident died alone because the young men were too paralyzed by fear to actually fight the shadow leopard. Accusing Turan is just the easiest way for them to wash the blood off their own hands and shift the blame for their cowardice onto someone else. And now, as if to prove it, one of the villagers screams Turan's name, charging forward with a raised fist and a look of pure rage. Turan doesn't even blink, leaning back just enough to let the punch whistle past his face with minimal effort. As he watches the man struggle to regain his balance, Turan reflects on how magic really is a convenient thing. For him, if he strongly wishes for something to happen, it simply does, though it always comes at the cost of his mana. He whispers a simple command, "Fall over," and the attacker suddenly faceplants into the grass as if his legs simply gave up on him. As another man rushes in, Turan keeps his movements subtle, dodging just a little bit so it isn't obvious he's using magic to enhance his reflexes. He catches the man's arm and delivers a sharp headbutt, hard enough to send a message, but just enough for the man not to die. The rest of the mob begins to swarm him, but Turan decides he's done playing around. He declares that he will dominate them, and in a sudden blur of motion, he systematically dismantles the group, sending their wooden weapons flying into the sky. A few moments later, the entire mob is scattered across the field, groaning in a heap of bruised limbs. Turan stands over them, noting that for 8 long years, he has successfully hidden the fact that he is a wizard. He looks down at the pile of brave villagers and tells them they should have saved some of that strength for Reba's funeral instead of wasting it on a fight they couldn't win. A group of women from the village, including the girl from the square, suddenly appears from the brush. Turan asks if they're here to fight too, but they quickly wave their hands in a panic, clarifying that they only came because they wanted to see him. Later that evening, Turan is back in his cabin, preparing for the inevitable fallout. He knows it's going to be chaos in town again and realizes the villagers will likely use this fight as an excuse to rip him off the next time he goes to trade his goods. He decides that's fine, if they won't be fair, he'll just keep beating them up until he gets a fair deal. He tells himself that he gave them a proper whooping and they shouldn't be back for a while, but his peace is immediately shattered by a series of violent bangs on his front door. Turan stands there in disbelief, thinking the villagers must be insane to come back for more so quickly. He flings the door open, shouting to ask who it is and if they really want to die, but he stops mid-sentence. Standing in his doorway isn't an angry local, but a tall, scarred man in travel-worn gear. The stranger apologizes for the inopportune moment and asks if he can request a favor. Turan is stunned, a traveler all the way out here. The man apologizes again, mentioning he saw the uninvited guests Turan dealt with moments ago. Turan tries to remember the manners his mother taught him, though talking nicely to anyone in this town feels incredibly awkward. As he looks the man over, he notices a sword strapped to his hip. Since there isn't an inn for miles, Turan sighs and invites the stranger inside. The man's stomach lets out a loud, echoing growl, prompting Turan to set the table. He serves a humble meal of bread, meat, and soup, which the traveler digs into as if it were a royal feast. The man is surprised to hear that Turan has never met anyone from outside the village, and Turan explains that he was born and raised as a shepherd on this very hill, noting that it's rare for tourists to ever find this place. As Turan takes a drink, the traveler watches him with a piercing gaze, finding the young shepherd interesting. He tells Turan that for someone who grew up in isolation, he is remarkably well versed in manners and must have had excellent parents. Turan looks away, mentioning he learned everything from his mother, though she died of an illness a few years ago. The traveler thanks him again, and Turan finally asks what would bring a man like him to such a remote country town. The stranger reveals he was asked a favor. The locals were looking for someone to take care of a monster puma. Turan realizes the truth immediately. He asks if the man is the wizard the village elder mentioned, and the traveler confirms it. However, the wizard has a question of his own. He explains that he senses a monster in the area, yet he doesn't see one anywhere. He finds it weird that Turan knows all about the elder and the beast, yet remains perfectly calm and isn't trying to run away. He leans in, point blank, and notes that if the monster went for a human, Turan would be the easiest target on the hill. He tells Turan he seems awfully brave for a simple shepherd before asking the one question Turan has been dreading, "Who are you?" Turan's mind flashes back to a conversation from his childhood. He remembers asking his mother why nobody can know he is a wizard, and her answer was simple: because of the bad nobles. She explained that if nobles are shepherds, then knights are like the dogs they keep, treated like family when useful, but sold off or sacrificed the moment it becomes necessary. She made him promise to never let another wizard find out his secret, warning him that they would separate them and turn Turan into a shepherd dog, to be discarded at will. As he stares back at the wizard across his table, he remembers his mother's final, chilling warning, that to keep his secret and his freedom, he might eventually have to kill people. The silence in the cabin stretches until the traveler breaks it, asking why Turan can't answer. Turan is internally bracing for a confrontation, but the traveler suddenly lets out a nervous laugh, scratching the back of his head. He tells Turan that making a face like that just makes his joke awkward, leaving the shepherd genuinely stunned as he realizes the life-or-death interrogation was actually just a bit of high-level teasing. Both men quickly offer apologies. Turan admits he doesn't have much of a sense of humor, especially when it comes to wizard jokes, while the traveler admits he took the teasing too far because Turan's reaction was so entertaining. With the tension finally broken, they introduce themselves properly. The traveler reaches out a hand, identifying himself as Kiorn, a wanderer. Turan takes the hand, introducing himself simply as the local shepherd. As they finish their meal, the conversation turns toward their lives. Turan mentions he is 18, while Kiorn reveals he is actually 75 years old. Despite his age, he looks remarkably fit, explaining that wizards age much slower and live longer than ordinary people. He tells Turan that he served the Arabayan family for 60 years before deciding to spend his later years roaming from place to place without settling down. Turan finds the idea of such a wandering life surprisingly romantic. For the first time in years, Turan finds himself genuinely enjoying a harmless conversation. The night slips away as they talk, and before they know it, the first light of dawn is peeking through the cabin window. Kiorn realizes how late it's gotten and prepares to head back out, placing a coin of Arabayan silver on the table to cover the cost of the meal. Turan accepts it and wishes the wizard a smooth hunt, though Kiorn smirks and tells him not to act like they'll never see each other again. He mentions he might come by a few more times to mooch off Turan's cooking on his way through. The morning air on Hisril Hill is crisp as Turan returns to his duties. Standing among his flock, he utters a single, soft command, "Gather." Immediately, the sheep obey, moving with a supernatural coordination as they cluster around their shepherd. Watching them, Turan reflects on meeting another wizard for the first time. He's surprised by how comfortable the conversation felt and concludes that Kiorn is a truly good person, nothing like the emotionless hunting dogs or arrogant nobles his mother had warned him about. However, he realizes he still hasn't figured out how to tell Kiorn that there are no more monsters left on the hill. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Kiorn is tracking the beast. He pauses, looking around the quiet trees with a puzzled expression. He finds unmistakable traces of a battle, but he can no longer feel a monster's presence in the area. He wonders if the village chief hired another wizard behind his back, but ultimately, he feels a sense of relief. As far as he's concerned, as long as the area is safe, that's all that matters. His moment of peace is shattered by a sudden, jarring sensation. Kiorn spins around, his expression shifting to one of pure shock as a massive, dark power surges nearby. From the shadows, a grotesque, armored claw emerges, featuring a singular, glowing yellow eye embedded in its palm, the first sign of something far worse than a mere predator. The shadow in the woods transforms into something far more terrifying. It is a mangled, grotesque mass of flesh, teeth, and glowing yellow eyes, a monster's wraith. Kiorn is caught completely off guard, wondering who could have possibly created such an abomination as the creature lunges with a deafening roar. He barely manages to block the initial strike, but the sheer force of the impact sends a shockwave through the clearing. Kiorn grits his teeth as he realizes the gravity of the situation. In this world, if you don't properly absorb or disperse the mana from a dead monster's corpse, the remains can manifest as a vengeful wraith. It is basic knowledge for any professional monster hunter, which leads Kiorn to a troubling conclusion: whoever killed the shadow leopard earlier was definitely a wizard, yet they intentionally left the mana to rot. He wonders if it was the mistake of an ignorant novice or if someone had a much darker intention for leaving this thing behind. Refusing to back down, Kiorn manifests a blade of pure golden light, concentrating his mana to destroy the abomination once and for all. He strikes with a powerful pong sound, but to his horror, his magic is simply nullified upon contact. He realizes with a sinking heart that the wraith's mana isn't just strong, it is vastly superior to his own. The creature suddenly vanishes into the shadows, leaving Kiorn spinning around in a panic, trying to track its movement as it prepares to counter his magic with its own. The ground beneath his feet begins to bubble and churn with dark energy. Before he can react, a massive, armored claw erupts from the dirt, catching him in a brutal surprise attack. Kiorn is thrown through the air, blood spraying from a deep wound in his side as he lets out a sharp cry of pain. Gasping for air and struggling to stand, he realizes that a mere knight, like himself, has no business fighting a creature of this caliber. This is a threat that requires at least a lower-ranking noble to even stand a chance. As the wraith looms over him, Kiorn huffs in exhaustion, reflecting on how you really never know what life will throw at you, even in a remote mountain village. Seeing the monster prepare its final move, he decides he won't die obediently. He grits his teeth and gathers the very last of his mana into his palm, preparing a final, suicidal strike. His plan is to wait for the exact moment the beast lunges so he can stab his concentrated energy directly into its core, taking the monster down with him. The monster lunges, its massive claws reaching for his head, and Kiorn readies his strike with a fierce look of determination. But just before the killing blow lands, a blinding blue light streaks across the forest with a thunderous "quah." A projectile, crackling with intense energy, slams into the wraith with the force of an explosion, obliterating its head and chest in an instant. As the massive frame of the wraith collapses into a heap of smoke, Kiorn stares in total disbelief at the power that just saved his life. Turan walks calmly into the clearing, looking up at the sky as if he just finished a simple chore, and asks Kiorn if he's alright. Kiorn is frozen in shock, the reality finally sinking in that the shepherd's earlier jokes were more than just teasing. He watches as Turan approaches, finally calling out the boy's name as he realizes the truth: the quiet shepherd is actually a powerful wizard. Kiorn asks why he didn't say anything earlier, but then quickly changes the question, asking why Turan chose to help him when he could have simply walked away and kept his secret. Turan pauses, his gaze drifting as he reflects on his answer. His mind goes back to the warmth of his cabin earlier that morning, where Kiorn had been resting after his journey. During their meal, Turan had asked the traveler why he goes so far for people, suggesting that with his skills, he could earn a lot more money in a much more comfortable life. Kiorn had simply laughed, calling the villagers pitiful people who live in constant fear on the frontier without any basic protection. He explained that since a wizard is, by nature, someone who inherited the power of a god, they should take pride in protecting the powerless commoners. While he admitted that not every wizard thinks that way, it was his own way of living. Back in the present, Turan offers a rare, genuine smile, noting that everyone truly does have their own way of living. However, the moment of peace is shattered as another massive surge of dark energy erupts in the woods. Kiorn immediately shifts back into a defensive stance, telling Turan to listen carefully. He warns that this new level of power is far beyond what they can handle and orders Turan to run to the village immediately to help them evacuate while he stays behind to hold the line. Kiorn braces himself, his hand wreathed in flames as he stares down the new, green-eyed entity, though he privately wonders how long he can possibly last. He is stunned when Turan simply responds that it's okay, acting as if the previous attack, which obliterated a high-level wraith, wasn't even his full strength. Kiorn watches in awe as Turan begins to gather a massive, swirling storm of blue mana, realizing he is standing in the presence of someone who could turn the entire world upside down. Turan looks at the new threat with a sharp, determined gaze, admitting that he was finally curious about his own limits too. Turan stands firm before the towering, grotesque mass of the monster, the air around him crackling with a raw energy that dwarfs everything else in the forest. As the blue mana swirls, he looks back with a surprisingly calm expression, admitting that he was actually curious about his own limits as well. Kiorn, however, is far from calm. He shouts a desperate warning that they have to join forces, insisting that no matter how much talent Turan has, this entity is far too tough to handle alone. But the momentum of the battle shifts before Kiorn can even finish his sentence. The veteran wizard is forced to a halt, staring at the ground in a state of pure shock as he realizes that, in this moment, he isn't any help at all. He admits to himself that he couldn't even react to Turan's last attack, concluding that stepping in now would only get in the way of a power he can barely comprehend. A massive surge of blue light erupts, illuminating the entire clearing as Turan pushes his mana to the brink. Yet, as the smoke clears, Turan looks down at his hand with a frustrated sigh, muttering a quiet, "Damn it." He launches himself at the beast, but his physical strike seems to pass right through the entity's core, leaving him to realize that the brute force he used earlier simply isn't working this time. Seeing the struggle, Kiorn finds his voice again and screams that you can't kill a wraith with physical attacks. Turan, skidding back across the dirt, looks up and asks the obvious question: if physical force is useless, then how is he supposed to kill it? He decides to pivot, thrusting his hand forward as he calls for fire. His gaze sharpens, his eyes glowing with an intense, kaleidoscopic light as he considers adding lightning to the mix. A massive burst of flame erupts, engulfing the creature's central eye in a roar of heat. But once again, Turan finds himself disappointed. He watches the flames flicker out and notes that even this elemental surge isn't quite hitting the mark. Kiorn is nearly paralyzed by what he's witnessing. He reflects on the basic laws of magic, thinking to himself that establishing proper causality is a fundamental requirement to apply a wizard's power to another living being. He stares at Turan in disbelief, wondering if it's possible that this boy doesn't even know the most basic common sense of a professional wizard. A sudden realization hits Kiorn like a physical blow. Turan was the one who killed the original monster and left it behind to become a wraith, which can only mean the shepherd has never actually absorbed mana a single day in his life. He is stunned that Turan is already this powerful without even knowing the proper sequence of making a fire before shooting it. Turan doesn't waste time on theory, he charges forward again, his movements a blur of speed and precision. He manifests a spinning orb of fire directly in his palm, ignoring the proper steps Kiorn is agonizing over. Kiorn watches the boy's back, noting that while making fire isn't difficult for any wizard, actually controlling it is supposed to require years of separate, intense training. To his absolute shock, Turan masters the control immediately, raising a pillar of flame high into the sky. Turan plants his foot, the ground cracking beneath the pressure as he prepares to unleash everything he has. He lunges, driving the concentrated fire directly into the wraith's core with a deafening explosion. The forest is momentarily lost in a sea of orange and red as the monster lets out a final, agonizing shriek. The abomination is completely engulfed, its dark form beginning to crumble under the relentless heat. Kiorn, caught up in the intensity of the moment, screams at Turan to keep his mind focused and to keep pouring his mana into the attack so the fire doesn't go out. He orders the boy to burn everything about the wraith away until nothing remains. Turan's expression is one of absolute focus, his eyes fixed on the target as the flames reach a white-hot intensity. As the last traces of the wraith vanish into ash, the clearing finally falls silent. Kiorn stands among the charred trees, looking up at the sky and reflecting on the fact that this was an absurdly strong wraith, a threat that would normally require the power of a noble-class wizard to even stand a chance. He repeats the thought in his head, his eyes wide with awe as he looks at the young man standing amidst the ruins. He can hardly process the reality of what he just saw, staring at the empty space where the monster once stood and wondering if it's really over. He is left with the staggering realization that a simple shepherd from the mountains just did the impossible. Fresh off the magical nuke Turan just dropped to delete that wraith, Kiorn is still breathing, which is honestly a miracle considering his hitbox was basically overlapping with the explosion. As the dust settles, Kiorn drops a pro tip for the rookie: if you don't want a vengeful spirit to respawn and ruin your afternoon again, you've got to loot the body and absorb the mana first. Turan, being the ultimate tutorial skipper, has to ask how that's even done, and Kiorn tells him to just imagine himself draining the energy into his own system. Turan closes his eyes and hits the confirm button, and suddenly, the monster's remains start glowing like a high-tier loot drop. The mana swirls into his palm in a bright green vortex, and Turan's eyes take on a cosmic, glowing effect as the energy surges through him. He's practically radiating green power veins, and Kiorn is officially shook. The veteran admits he can't believe his eyes, mentioning that Turan should feel a bit of pleasure from the absorption before realizing this simple shepherd just hit high-level stats on his very first attempt at mana consumption. Kiorn goes into a bit of a lore dump, explaining that while most wizards have to slowly grind their mana levels through age or by killing other casters, Turan is already handling power at a level that puts him in a completely different league. Kiorn pulls a total 180, shifting from traveling mentor to humble servant as he bows and asks Turan which noble house he actually belongs to. Turan looks incredibly awkward, sweating through the interaction and telling Kiorn to stop the formalities and just wipe the blood off his face first. Back at the cabin, the vibe is post-battle recovery mode, with Kiorn sporting a sling and some bandages. He keeps apologizing for making someone as esteemed as Turan help him, which earns him a sharp glare from the shepherd who just wants to get back to his quiet life. Kiorn can't let it go, though. He asks the million-dollar question, why would a wizard with game-breaking potential choose to live as a humble shepherd? Turan admits it was his mother's dying request, and to his surprise, Kiorn actually calls her wise instead of calling it overprotective parenting. Kiorn explains the harsh reality of their world's power scaling. Great power inevitably brings conflict. He recounts a massive war from 20 years ago between the House of Erebayan and the House of Zahar, where nearly a third of the Erebayan knights were wiped out. Turan looks somber as Kiorn reveals that everyone close to him, his friend who wanted to open a laundry shop, his teacher, and even his wife and son, were massacred by House Zahar while he alone survived. Kiorn admits Turan's mother was right to keep him hidden because a knight's life can vanish more meaninglessly than a commoner's in the crossfire of noble wars. However, he tells Turan that his mother was wrong about one thing, his aptitude. Kiorn notes that even as a skilled knight, he couldn't bring down that wraith, yet Turan destroyed it with ease. He delivers his final verdict with total conviction. Turan's potential isn't just that of a knight, at a minimum, he is noble level. Picking up from Kiorn's assessment, he looks at Turan and doubles down, stating that among those with potential, Turan possesses at least an upper-tier aptitude. The revelation hits Turan hard. He looks up at the traveler and asks if the story his mother told him, that his father was merely a knight, was actually a lie. Kiorn clarifies that it isn't necessarily a lie. On rare occasions, a child with power far below their station is born to nobles, just as a noble-class child can occasionally be born among the knightly class. Because of this rare gift, Kiorn tells Turan directly that it would be better for him to leave his isolated hill and finally go out into the world. When Turan asks a simple, why, Kiorn explains the dire state of their reality. He notes that humanity desperately needs more powerful nobles and knights because humans are still not the complete masters of the world. Long ago, other races were pushed out by the gods, and they are still lurking in the shadows, waiting for any chance to rise again and reclaim what they lost. Instead of preparing for this threat, the current nobles spend all their time and energy waging war against each other. This is why the world is in an age that desperately needs strong and kind nobles who actually care about the people, just like Turan. Kiorn looks around the humble cabin and asks Turan point-blank if he is truly satisfied living the rest of his life as a simple shepherd. Turan remains silent, his expression unreadable as he considers the weight of the wizard's words. He asks what exactly he could hope to gain below the mountain, and Kiorn tells him that the answer depends entirely on what he wants, whether it's wealth, fame, authority, family, or even just friendship. Any of those things are nearly impossible to find while hiding out here in isolation. Kiorn starts to head for the door, telling Turan to just try imagining the possibilities. He suggests that Turan could wander as a free spirit, destroying the monsters that threaten innocent people, or perhaps become an explorer venturing into the unknown. There's even the path of being adopted into a noble house to walk the true path of power. Standing outside under the vast sky, Turan finally admits that Kiorn is right. It would be far more interesting than herding sheep on the same hill forever. For the first time in his life, he is seriously curious about the world beyond the village. Kiorn smiles, though he admits he worries he might be planting unfair expectations in the boy's head. Regardless, he promises to support every possibility Turan chooses. Then, he realizes he skipped a major step and asks what Turan's bloodline ability is. Turan is confused, so Kiorn explains that a bloodline ability is a specific trait inherited from the divine ancestors known as the Freyans. It is the one thing that truly separates the noble class from the knights. He asks if there was ever a spell that felt unusually easy, or perhaps a natural, outstanding ability that doesn't even require mana to use. Turan remains humble, suggesting that he isn't actually that strong, he just assumes that having mana naturally makes a wizard's physical abilities more powerful. When pressed for anything unique, he mentions he has a good nose and is pretty good at throwing stones. Kiorn considers this, noting that an exceptional sense of smell can indeed be considered a bloodline ability. He mentions that while being skilled with thrown weapons is a well-known trait of House Arabayan, it's a fairly common skill overall. He asks Turan to tell him more, and as Turan begins to explain, the atmosphere shifts. Suddenly, Kiorn's demeanor changes, becoming cold and incredibly serious. Turan asks why he's acting so strange, but Kiorn simply states that he thinks he knows which great house Turan's abilities are actually closest to. Turan's curiosity is piqued, and he asks which house it is. Kiorn looks toward the horizon and names a great house known as the Pursuers, or the Hunters. It is House Sahar, the very house that fought a brutal, bloody war with Kiorn's own House Arabayan. Turan can only stare in stunned silence as the realization of his potential lineage, and its violent history, finally begins to sink in. The name drops like a heavy anchor, House Sahar. Turan is frozen, his mind racing as he tries to process the weight of the revelation. He looks at Kiorn, his expression a mix of shock and guilt, asking if he's really from the same bloodline as the people who destroyed the Elder's life. His thoughts are a mess, he wonders if he should apologize for the actions of relatives he's never even met. To him, they are practically strangers, but the blood tie feels like a permanent debuff he didn't ask for. Kiorn, sensing the kid's internal spiral, breaks the silence. He tells Turan not to make such a worried expression, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. Turan is still reeling, pointing out that even if Kiorn wasn't in that war personally, the history between their houses is still there. But Kiorn just smiles, brushing it off as an adult situation. He explains that if they try to wash blood with blood, the cycle of violence will just keep looping, it's the ultimate zero-sum game. The conversation shifts as Kiorn catches Turan's gaze. He asks if Turan has any regrets, specifically about being told to leave his isolated hill and head into the world. But Turan realizes he's not being judged for his lineage, Kiorn trusts his character. Kiorn sees the goodness in him, especially because Turan chose to save him even at the risk of revealing a secret identity he'd hidden his entire life. Kiorn even suggests that if someone like Turan rose to power in the Zahar family, it could actually prevent another terrible war from breaking out. Either way, Kiorn tells him not to overthink it yet, it's not like he has to join the Zahars this second. But for Turan, the path forward has finally cleared. He looks out over the landscape and declares that he wants to try going down the mountain. Kiorn is clearly pleased, though he advises that they shouldn't rush it. Turan, being the genuinely good person he is, insists they wait until Kiorn's injuries heal before they start their journey. Back inside the cabin, the vibe shifts into a deep dive tutorial on the game's core mechanics. Kiorn explains that mana is essentially the key to omnipotence, the fundamental fuel required for all magic. Turan is skeptical of the omnipotent label, noting that you still need mana that specifically matches the magic you're trying to cast. Kiorn agrees and begins a masterclass on the 3 factors that determine magic's difficulty. First is bloodline. It's the RNG stats you're born with. For example, Turan can't just cast a high-level heal on Kiorn's wounds because it's not in his kit. But for the Ravista bloodline from the south, healing is basically a passive ability they can do without any training. Second is affinity, or familiarity. It's the concept that a mage performs better with tasks they actually enjoy or are used to. It's why Turan's fireball was so insanely fast, he wasn't just casting a spell, he was treating it like his practice stone throwing. Kiorn confirms that if he'd just tried a standard fire spell, the firepower and speed wouldn't have been nearly as impressive. Finally, Kiorn drops the most important factor, causality. This is the high-level theory that even a veteran like him doesn't fully grasp. He asks Turan what would happen if he tried to kill him directly using raw mana. The answer? Probably just some useless light shining from his head. Causality is the hidden mechanic that bridges the gap between raw power and a world-changing effect, and as they sit in the quiet of the cabin, it's clear that Turan's journey is about to involve a lot more than just throwing rocks. Kiorn continues the lesson on the mechanics of magic, hovering his hand over a wooden mug to demonstrate the sparks of magical static. He explains that failing to establish causality leads to unstable phenomena, especially when a mage tries to achieve a difficult outcome without an appropriate cause. Charon watches the display and starts to see the pattern, admitting that he's beginning to understand the concept. He reasons that if he wanted to kill someone like Kiorn, it would be far more natural to provide a direct cause of death, like creating and shooting flames, rather than just spending mana to wish for their end. Kiorn is visibly impressed by the shepherd's quick wit, laughing that Charon could have easily been a scholar instead of a mage. Charon, however, is still stuck on a technicality. He can control ordinary animals at will, so he wonders why magical beasts require this extra step of causality. Kiorn explains that it all comes down to the presence of mana within the creature itself. Outside the cabin, the peaceful scenery remains unchanged, but inside, the level of the conversation is shifting from basic survival to high-level theory. Charon reflects on how magic certainly isn't easy, but Kiorn reminds him that a truly excellent mage must understand the principles and situations behind the power, not just the mana itself. The conversation turns toward the specifics of Charon's potential heritage, with Charon asking if the Zahar bloodline possesses any unique magic. Kiorn confirms that their bloodline is legendary for being skilled in stealth and tracking. Eager to test this theory, Kiorn tells Charon to give it a try right now. Charon closes his eyes, focusing his will on becoming a ghost. He wishes for neither sound nor smell to be detected, wanting to remain completely unseen by others. The magic activates with a subtle swish as Charon's form begins to blur into the background. Kiorn watches with bated breath, asking if the spell actually worked. The cabin suddenly feels much emptier as Kiorn finds himself standing alone by the table, with only a faint shimmer on the rug indicating where Charon once stood. Kiorn admits that the boy succeeded, marveling at the fact that he literally cannot see him. He swallows hard in disbelief, realizing just how terrifyingly effective the Zahar traits truly are. The cabin stands silent for a moment longer as Charon maintains the veil. Finally, Charon fades back into reality, his physical form shimmering into existence. Kiorn admits that even after all these years, seeing that ability is still frightening, noting that during the war, the Erebion Knights feared the Zahar stealth more than anything else. While he admits the ability is unfairly powerful, Kiorn warns Charon that it isn't invincible and offers to teach him a few magic training methods to round out his skills. Charon pauses, asking the obvious question, why would a veteran mage teach so much to someone from an enemy family? Kiorn reminds him that Charon saved his life and even treated his wounds after the battle. Placing a hand over his heart, Kiorn declares that he trusts Charon's character regardless of his last name. The scene shifts from the isolation of the hill to the village square, where the village chief is having a complete meltdown. He is stunned that Charon is actually selling his sheep and leaving, frantically asking who is going to do the shepherding and why the village wasn't consulted first. Charon is entirely done with the drama, telling the villagers they should have figured out how to find a new shepherd themselves. He points out that he can do whatever he wants with his own belongings and tells them they had better buy the sheep at a fair price. If they don't, Charon threatens to just release the entire flock into the wild and walk away, leaving the village with nothing. The chief and the other villagers look at the scarred man beside Charon and realize they have zero leverage. The chief thinks to himself that Charon is a man who keeps his word, and there is absolutely nothing to gain from irritating him further. Grudgingly, he hands over a heavy bag of coins, officially buying Charon's freedom. Charon and Kiorn begin the long walk away from the village, with Kiorn telling him that he is free to do whatever he wants now. Charon mentions that the villagers still technically owe Kiorn compensation for his services, and asks if he should go back and collect it by force. Kiorn just smiles, stating he had no intention of taking their money since it was Charon who actually caught the beast. Charon offers a rare smile of his own, satisfied with the outcome. They reach a fork in the road deep in the forest, and Kiorn stops, announcing that they must finally part ways here. Charon stands at the edge of the forest, the weight of the parting hanging heavy in the air. He looks at Kiorn and simply says, "Thank you for everything." The veteran knight offers a final, warm smile, telling him to take care. Charon watches him, addressing him as "Elder" one last time, and expresses his hope that when their paths eventually cross again, it will be with smiling faces. He remains there for a long time, rooted to the spot, as he watches Kiorn's retreating figure slowly disappear into the distance. As the silence of the woods settles around him, Charon finally begins to realize why he felt so uncomfortable when the old knight spoke to him with such formality. While he never lacked for affection from his mother, he realizes that he had secretly been yearning for a father figure, someone who could serve as a role model for the kind of man he should actually become. With that realization weighing on his mind, he turns away from the forest and begins his own journey. The lush greenery eventually fades into a harsh, unforgiving wasteland. The wind whistles through jagged stone canyons, kicking up clouds of dust and sand that blur the horizon. Turan moves steadily through the barren landscape, his white cloak fluttering in the gale as he navigates the rocky terrain. His sharp eyes catch a movement in the distance, and he spots a small group of figures moving across the sand. He wonders if they are traveling merchants who move from village to village and decides it's a good opportunity to ask for directions. As he approaches, a man with a scarred face and an eye patch stops, demanding to know who has the nerve to block their path. Turan remains calm and polite, explaining that he is traveling alone and simply wants to know where the nearest city is. The man tells him that if he follows the road they just came from, he'll eventually reach a city called Murai. Turan thanks them for the information and prepares to move on, but the sound of a heavy footstep stops him in his tracks. The leader of the group looms over him, asking if he really thinks he can just leave after getting what he wanted. He tells Turan that if someone receives something, they are expected to give something in return. The sound of steel ringing out fills the canyon as the group draws their swords, surrounding Turan in an instant. The leader orders him to take off his bulging bag, and when Turan asks if they are bandits, the man only laughs. He calls Turan's attempt to walk alone recklessness, noting that in a wasteland like this, no one would find it strange if a person simply vanished. While the blade is held to his throat, the leader tells Turan to strip off his bag and cloak while they are being nice, claiming that killing him and stripping the body would just be an unnecessary amount of work. Turan realizes he's dealing with bandits who have no qualms about murder. However, as the killers close in, his mind flashes back to the quiet cabin on Hizril Hill. He remembers Kiorn sitting across from him, demonstrating the principles of fire and the complex laws of causality that govern a wizard's power. Instead of showing fear, a dark, determined smirk spreads across Turan's face. He looks at the armed men and realizes that since he needs to refine his new skills, these bandits have provided the perfect opportunity for some live practice.
A sharp close-up of his eyes reveals absolute focus, even as a bandit scoffs mockingly in the background. The entire gang bursts out laughing, taunting him as a lunatic for talking like a genuine wizard. Ignoring their jeers, Turan makes a swift downward gesture with his hand, causing a vibrant green swirl of mana to burst into life. With a sharp cry of wind, a massive vortex erupts from his palm, launching the bandits backward into the air. Mid-fight, Turan reflects on his training, realizing that shaping existing air currents requires far less mana than creating wind out of thin air. Watching the groaning men scatter across the sand, he is surprised by his own strength, realizing he can whip up a violent gale with almost no effort. Moving to his next experiment, Turan pulls out a water bottle and uses his mana to levitate the liquid into floating droplets between his fingers. With a quick surge of intent, the droplets instantly freeze and condense into sharp, jagged shards of ice. He stands ready in the desert, surrounded by a halo of lethal ice spikes locked onto his targets. The projectiles streak forward, piercing through a bandit who screams in agony as he is struck down. Observing the spell's effect, Turan contemplates its utility, noting that throwing ordinary stones might actually be faster and more powerful. Terrified by the display of real magic, the bandit leader drops to his knees, begging desperately for forgiveness. Surrounded by his fallen crew, the boss offers everything he owns if Turan will only spare his life. Turan doesn't say a word, taking a cold, deliberate step toward the survivors. In a single violent flash of power, a massive vertical burst erupts, obliterating the rest of the gang at once. Left standing alone amidst the wreckage, the eye patch leader stares in absolute shock at the sudden carnage. Turan stands victorious, towering over the fallen bodies and pillars of blood. Looking down at the kneeling boss, Turan tells him he has just one question to ask. He demands to know why they were foolish enough to attack a lone traveler so recklessly, considering anyone on the road could be a wizard. Trembling, the boss explains their logic. It was simply because Turan bowed his head and acted so politely. Because Turan greeted them respectfully despite their rudeness, the bandits assumed he was just an ordinary, defenseless weakling. Turan offers a small, knowing smile, thanking the bandit for teaching him an incredibly useful lesson about human perception. Terrified, the boss asks one last time if his life will truly be spared. A stark close-up reveals the bandit's absolute horror as a single, lethal drop of water hovers ominously directly above him. The screen flashes with the name Turan, marking a permanent shift in his path. In a vivid flashback, his mentor Kjorn warns a younger Turan that he will encounter all kinds of people on his journey. Kjorn delivers a cold, unyielding piece of advice: never show mercy to scum-like bandits who harm others for profit. Recalling the image of a sword, Turan finally grasps the true meaning behind his mentor's stern teachings. Back in the present, the bandit leader lies dead in the sand. Turan realizes that sparing a predator out of pity could cost the lives of 10 good people later. Turning away from the scene, Turan begins walking, following the deep wheel tracks the bandits left in the desert sand. As his figure fades into the vast horizon, a single, sharp realization remains burned forever into his mind. Turan tracks his own footprints through the desert sand, the heavy weight of taking human life for the first time sinking into his thoughts. A brief image of the eye patch leader crosses his mind, bringing a flicker of guilt, but Kjorn's stern warning returns to shield him from regret. Visualizing the bandits he faced, he recognizes a hard truth: those who rob and kill without hesitation will never stop, they will simply hunt new victims. Turan's boot steps off the sand and onto solid, grassy soil. Just as weeds eventually cover desert wheel tracks, his chaotic heart begins to settle as he fully embraces his mentor's philosophy. Reaching the edge of a high cliff, he gazes out over a lush green landscape beneath a brilliant blue sky, realizing he has finally crossed into a new world. A close-up shows genuine awe on Turan's face as he takes in his very first sight of civilization. The destination comes into focus: the small city of Murray, a heavily fortified town anchored by a massive, white-walled castle at its center. Carrying his heavy travel pack, Turan steps into a crowded market square, completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of people surrounding him. He looks up at the towering stone architecture, marveling at how vast and grand it is compared to his tiny home. A village. Standing in the center of the bustling street, surrounded by merchants and shoppers, the reality dawns on him: he is truly in a real city. Hoping to gather information, Turan approaches a local fruit vendor. When the vendor asks what he wants to buy, Turan politely explains that he isn't actually a customer. The vendor's mood flips instantly, turning hostile and telling Turan to get lost if he isn't spending money. Baffled by the man's immediate rudeness, Turan wonders if cities have an unspoken rule where you must buy fruit just to ask a simple question. To get the directions he needs, Turan points to the apples and asks for the price. The vendor quotes him 2 dupit. Unfamiliar with the currency, Turan looks confused, prompting the vendor to realize he's an outsider and clarify that other coins are acceptable too. Turan reaches into his coin pouch to pull out the payment. With the transaction complete, Turan asks where to find an inn, and the vendor points him toward a blue-roofed building located directly behind the cape shop. The scene shifts to the sign of the pub and inn, which the vendor claimed is the grandest establishment in the city. Stepping inside, Turan is immediately greeted by a cheerful blonde staff member named Lena. Lena playfully compliments his looks as Turan inquires about the cost of a room for the night. When she quotes the price at 16 dupit, Turan agrees and prepares to hand over the money. Passing over a small pouch of coins, Turan mentions that he has one crucial question he needs answered. He asks Lena if there are any monsters in the surrounding area that carry an active bounty. A close-up highlights his inner drive. He needs to kill monsters to absorb their mana while simultaneously earning money for his journey. Lena pauses hesitantly, leaving Turan wondering why she isn't giving him a straightforward answer. Breaking the silence, Lena delivers a blunt urban reality: there's no such thing as free in this world. Turan's confusion deepens as she shifts the topic to something called a city hall. Now seated at a table with a drink, Turan asks Lena to explain what a city hall actually is. Leaning over the counter, Lena bursts out laughing, teasing Turan for being such an innocent country bumpkin ignorant of basic city life. She explains that city halls manage public administration and are run by official staff under the local lord. She wraps up by noting that since the sun has already set, the hall is likely closed, advising him to head there first thing tomorrow morning to claim a monster bounty. Back at the bar, Lena turns to Turan and asks if he is a monster hunter, a title that leaves him utterly confused. She explains a widespread belief among commoners. People think that if an ordinary person slays enough monsters, they can eventually awaken as a wizard. Internally scoffing at the claim, Turan dismisses the idea as nothing more than foolish superstition. Suddenly, a heavy hand slams onto Turan's shoulder, belonging to a massive, muscular man in a headband named Midden, who insists he has witnessed this transformation with his own eyes. Lena sighs with relief to see Midden alive, while the warrior boldly declares he won't die until he successfully becomes a wizard himself. Midden laughs boisterously and apologizes for his aggressive greeting, though Turan remains visibly unimpressed by the loud hunter. Intrigued by any path to greater power, Turan asks Midden to elaborate on how killing monsters could possibly generate magic. Lena chimes in, explaining the theory. Since established wizards grow stronger by hunting monsters, common folk assume the same rule applies to regular humans. Midden introduces his 3 crewmates, revealing that all 4 of them are hunting monsters with the sole objective of becoming wizards. When Turan asks if any of them have actually succeeded, Midden admits they haven't, noting that the city's only wizards are the Lord's primary mage and his 3 apprentices. Noticing the weapon at Turan's hip, Midden points out that his sling looks well worn from heavy use. Turan confirms it is built for rapid firing, leading Midden to suggest it would be ideal for hunting small monster game like rabbits or foxes. Recognizing the young traveler's skill, Midden invites Turan to join their party, mentioning they are actively looking for another ranged shooter. Turan responds with a subtle, knowing smile. Later that night, lying in his room at the inn, Turan reflects on the offer and decides to decline, reasoning that hunting in a group offers him 0 benefit. He lies back and thinks over the chaotic series of events since his arrival in civilization. Gazing at his travel pack, he finds it surreal that he has truly left his home village behind forever. Turan raises his hand, watching blue sparks of mana crackle across his fingers as he contemplates what his future holds. Suddenly, the subtle sound of movement outside his door causes him to freeze in instant alert. He sits up rapidly, staring intensely at the door and calling out, "Who is it?" A vivid memory of Kjorn flashes in his mind, recalling his mentor's warning to never drop his guard, even within the walls of an inn. In the memory, Kjorn emphasizes that entering a city does not mean you are in a safe haven. The flashback fades as Turan takes the advice to heart. Back in the present, Turan channels mana into his hand, his palm glowing softly as he reaches for the door handle. He slowly cracks the door open, peering out with a sharp, lethal glare. His eyes widen in complete shock as he recognizes the figure standing in the dimly lit hallway. It is Lena, the inn worker, casually asking if he was already asleep. Turan stands frozen in bewilderment as Lena claims she was worried his room might be cold tonight. Blushing, Lena begins unfastening the ribbon on her dress, announcing she came to keep him warm, leaving a thoroughly stunned Turan demanding to know what she means by that. Turan looks on in complete disbelief as Lena, the blonde in Mage, blushes and begins untying the ribbon of her dress, leaving him to demand what she means by such an offer. Standing inches away at his room's open doorway, Lena purrs that it's exactly what it sounds like, while Turan freezes, utterly dumbfounded. Stepping closer, she explicitly offers her services for a handful of coin, prompting Turan to defensively question what happens if he has no interest at all. Lena leans in with a sly grin, placing a slender hand on Turan's shoulder, teasing him not to lie when his deepest desires are written plain across his face. Instantly, Turan empties his mind, adopting a hilariously serene, Buddha-like composure as the echo of a temple bell rings out. The sudden, bizarre transformation leaves Lena completely horrified, sweating in sheer confusion. In a sudden flashback, his mentor, Kjorn, shrieks a frantic warning, "Don't do it." Kjorn warns a younger Tyran to exercise extreme caution around in maids and prostitutes, as they frequently carry hidden afflictions and diseases. Kjorn clarifies that while their own bodies possess strong resistances, being reckless could cause Tyran to pass the sickness on to another woman in the future. His mentor's stern advice echoes in Tyran's mind, warning him never to let base desire trap him into a lifetime of regret. The cold truth settles in: life within the city walls carries its own hidden dangers. Having turned down her advance, Tyran watches Lena stomp furiously down the staircase, realizing that city dwellers put a steep price on even the simplest interactions. Lying back on his bed, Tyran reflects on the aggressive fruit vendor and Lena's proposition, concluding that the city truly is a cold, heartless place. As he rests in the quiet, Tyran's sharp ears pick up quiet murmurs echoing outside his door, addressing a boss. A voice speaks up from the corridor, "I've got something I'm curious about." Out in the hallway, Midden's crew questions why he bothered trying to recruit Tyran earlier, arguing the skinny kid looked entirely useless in a fight. Tyran smirks from his bed as he listens to another mercenary joke that Tyran's arrogant mouth would at least make prime monster bait. Tyran listens intently as Midden reveals his true motives. The boy reminded him of his own past. Midden admits that hearing Tyran relies on something as fragile as a simple sling made him genuinely fear for the boy's life out in the wild. Midden explains he wanted the kid under his wing just so he might survive a little longer in the brutal wilderness. Touched by the gesture, the subordinate chuckles softly, calling Midden way too soft-hearted to be running a band of rough mercenaries. Overhearing this unexpected display of warmth, Tyran's cynical smirk softens into something gentle. Rolling onto his back with a faint smile, he reconsiders his earlier judgment. Perhaps the city isn't quite as cold-hearted as he thought. The next morning, Tyran stands before the towering, opulent gates of City Hall. Approaching the front counter, he asks the receptionist if he is an official, to which the clerk dryly retorts, asking what else he could possibly look like. Tyran calmly declares his intent: he has come to hunt monsters, leaving the official staring back in total astonishment. Kjorn's past teachings resurface in Tyran's mind, recalling the day his mentor warned him that the world would never show him unearned kindness. A younger Tyran had tilted his head, asking, "Why is that?" Kjorn explained that while the world owes no one a favor, there exists one foolproof method to command respect from anyone he meets. His mentor's final lesson hits home: reveal that you're a wizard, then ordinary people will bow their heads. Back in the present, the official slides a bounty poster across the desk, depicting a menacing, dark avian beast, officially commissioning Tyran for his very first monster hunt. At the City Hall counter, the mustachioed official hands a single sheet of parchment over to Tyran, strictly warning him that it must be returned. Examining the paper closely, Tyran studies the sketch of a strange, feathered beast, asking if it's some kind of crow monster. The official sneers back, asking sarcastically if it looks like a cat to him. He lays out the city's ironclad law: any slain beast must be dragged back into town. Without a wizard to disperse its mana, the rotting corpse will twist into a horrifying wraith. The official warns that abandoning a monster carries a death sentence under city law, but Tyran's gaze remains ice cold, replying that he's already well aware. A grim memory resurfaces: a grotesque, multi-eyed flesh abominations born of untamed mana, and Tyran silently swears never to repeat that mistake. When Tyran asks why the city's knights don't clear the beasts themselves, the official scoffs, asking if he thinks the guard has time to waste on errands outside the walls. He explains that a knight's sole duty is keeping order inside the city, leaving no luxury for hunting monsters in the wild. Snatching the quest paper, Tyran turns on his heel. Behind him, the official sighs and wipes a sweat-drenched brow, muttering that another useless corpse is about to rot beyond the gates. A giant, cracked yellow eye glares out from the darkness in an agonizing final moment. Thud, the lifeless body of the blade crow hits a white cloth, a smoking, jagged crater blasted straight through its chest. Back inside City Hall, the mustachioed official stares down in utter, sweat-dripping disbelief. Dropping to his knees before the corpse, the clerk shrieks, unable to comprehend how Turan returned so fast. Standing impassively in his white coat, Turan listens as the official stammers, asking if he truly took down the beast alone. Turan replies with a cold, simple "indeed." Turan demands his reward, sending the sweating official into a panic as he stutters out orders for an immediate payout while a runner sprints into the back room. A heavy, clinking purse of coins drops into Turan's palm. The official offers a shaky word of praise, telling him to get some well-earned rest, to which Turan plainly replies, "Thank you." Nearby receptionists crowd around the fallen beast in awe, marveling that Turan brought back the blade crow with its precious, razor-sharp wing feathers completely intact. The mustachioed clerk fixates on the young mage, his gaze turning deeply unsettled and quiet. As Turan turns to leave, the official calls out, asking why he's still hanging around the desk. Turan asks if there are any other high-value monsters lurking nearby, catching the official completely off guard. Turan stares back deadpan while the sweating clerk chokes out, "Don't tell me, you can still keep going." Over a steaming table, the tavern keeper presents the spread. "These are the most expensive items on our menu." A mouth-watering feast fills the view: a massive glazed ham, sharp cheese wheels, rich stew, warm bread, and a frothing wooden mug of ale. Lena throws her arms wide with a beaming smile, declaring she never imagined anyone could slay 30 monsters in just 3 days. Chowing down on a fistful of bread, Turan scarfs down the meal while Lena remarks that he must have made an absolute fortune. Taking a calm sip from his mug, Turan clarifies that lining his pockets isn't his true objective. His real motive drives him: the monster's raw mana. A dark flashback shows Turan channeling glowing green mana pools directly from slain beasts into his own body, steadily building his magic reserves. Gazing down at his hands, Turan measures his growth, realizing his total mana pool has multiplied several times over since he first studied under Kjorn. Yet a shadow of doubt crosses his eye: he's hitting a ceiling, and hunting low-tier monsters won't push his strength any further. Lena blushes, stuttering, "Actually," as Turan glances up, confused. The camera pulls back to reveal the dynamic shift. Midden sits beside Lena, both staring in absolute horror at a mountain of lick-clean platters. Midden stammers, asking if someone else snuck a bite, while Lena whispers in shock, "You ate every single bite by yourself." A muscular cook with a gray headwrap wipes sweat from his brow, marveling at how a guy with such a skinny build can pack away a mountain of food. In the background, Lena wears a bright smile as the cook admits it's been a while since he prepared that dish, genuinely glad it hit the spot. Turan turns and walks away, offering a polite word of thanks for the delicious meal, while the cheerful cook calls out a promise to make it even better next time. Suddenly, an aggressive hand reaches out from behind, violently snatching the collar of Turan's white coat. 2 shady monster hunters, part of Midden's crew, corner him. The sneering thug holding his coat snickers, asking Turan if he's enjoying high-class food all by himself, while Turan simply glares back, completely unfazed. Calling Turan a skinny runt, the thug tries to intimidate him, but Turan's expression remains stone-cold and indifferent. The thug brings up the rumors, sneering about how much money Turan has been pulling in lately. He starts demanding a little charity for his crew, but before the sentence can even leave his mouth, Turan launches a lightning-fast counterstrike straight into his jaw. The thug recoils in pain, swearing in disbelief as his partner in glasses explodes in rage. Turan mockingly clasps his hands in a polite, prayer-like gesture, offering a calm, sarcastic smile as he asks, "Didn't you ask for charity?" Infuriated, the thug in glasses swings a massive fist downward, roaring at Turan not to get cocky. Slipping the strike effortlessly, Turan counters with a devastating overhead blow straight into the thug's face, slamming him to the ground. The first thug charges back in with a woe. Odin's stool but stumbles awkwardly as Turan anticipates his every move. Without breaking a sweat, Turan catches the incoming stool with a single hand, stopping it dead in its tracks. Clamping down on the side of the thug's head, Turan squeezes his face with terrifying force. A blinding flash of mana detonates, sending the thug airborne and skidding across the wooden floorboards. A sharp, menacing voice suddenly slices through the chaos. Don't. The command repeats, focusing tightly on a tense, trembling jawline. It's Lena, screaming in pure, red-faced fury, demanding they stop tearing apart her inn. Later that night, the muscular hunter boss, Midden, bows deeply in the hallway, his two battered, bruised subordinates standing shamefully behind him. Standing at the doorway, Midden offers his sincerest apologies to Turan, explaining that he's already dragged his men through a harsh scolding. He swears on his pride that an incident like this will never happen again. Midden admits his crew has been running dangerously low on funds, and jealousy clearly got the better of his men after seeing Turan's recent success. Barking at his two bruised thugs to fall in line, both men bow their heads, sweating as they mutter out an apology. Turan asks if things have really gotten that dire, and Midden admits their hunting operations have completely ground to a halt. Clenching his fist, Midden reveals they might not even be able to afford their room fees in 3 days, though he insists it's his own burden to carry. Reaching into his coat, Turan tosses a heavy, clinking pouch of coins straight into Midden's hands. Stunned by the gesture, Midden stammers, asking why he would hand over such a fortune. Turan explains it's payback for the genuine concern Midden showed earlier when he tried to recruit and protect him. In return, Turan asks for one simple favor: give me some information. A wave of relief washes over Midden as a bright smile returns to his face. Thumping his chest, he boasts that information is his specialty, promising to reveal everything he knows. The view pulls back into a sweeping aerial shot of the bustling medieval city below. High above on a windswept grassy cliff, Turan's coat billows as he stares down at the surrounding forests, preparing for his next move, fully aware that this might be his very last hunt in this city. Preparing to leave the city behind, Turan reflects on the invaluable intelligence Midden shared regarding his next destination. A sudden memory surfaces sitting across from Midden at a dimly lit tavern table, realizing that beneath the man's rough exterior lies a genuinely good soul. Comparing Midden to his old mentor, Kjorn, Turan realizes that while Midden lacks the veteran warrior's battle-hardened experience, his absence of cynicism makes him far kinder. Back in the present, Turan's eye widens in shock as a sudden wave of instinct signals that something is deeply, terribly wrong. A sharp metallic scent hits the wind, the unmistakable stench of fresh blood. Dread grips his chest as he desperately prays his worst instincts are proven wrong. Turan vaults forward, sprinting down the dirt path and tearing through the forest to investigate. Shadows swallow the path as a heavy, suffocating silence settles over the deep woods. He skids to a halt, staring at deep, brutal claw marks freshly gouged into a tree trunk. Standing in the center of the clearing, Turan scans the eerie stillness of the silent forest. Looking ahead, horror strikes. A bloody body lies slumped lifelessly against the base of a tree. Wait, this man! A grim close-up reveals the blood-splattered, lifeless face of one of the hunters. Isn't he one of Midden's men? Turan stands frozen over the gruesome scene, his expression turning deadly serious as silence falls. A chilling view catches the dead hunter's glassy, unblinking eyes staring into nothingness. Beside the man's bloodied hand lie 3 silver coins scattering the dirt, the very payment Turan had gifted their group. Dropping to his knees, Turan finds Midden lying in the dirt, heavily wounded, drenched in blood, and clinging to his final breaths. In a tense, heavy silence, Turan cradles the dying hunter boss in his arms. Nearby, a weak, raspy voice barely gasps out through the quiet, "Ra." Turan turns his head, spotting Midden's dying crew member slumped against a tree, barely clinging to life. With his absolute final breath, the subordinate manages to choke out a single word, "A rabbit." Turan repeats it in utter disbelief, "A rabbit." The air shifts as a grotesque, blood-drenched mouth chews violently on fresh flesh. Across the road lies an absolute slaughter, Midden's entire crew lies dead while a massive shadow looms over them in the distance. The beast steps into view, a colossal, terrifying horned rabbit with glowing red eyes, black facial markings, and blood dripping from its fangs. Sensing sudden movement, Turan quickly turns around. Without warning, the horned rabbit launches a lightning-fast ambush, tearing through the air directly toward him. Turan barely evades the strike, sweating as he realizes the creature's speed is insane. Skidding to a halt, Turan catches his breath, knowing he was a fraction of a second away from being hit. He immediately channels his mana, wind whistling violently around his hand as he prepares to fight back. Swirling gale currents envelop Turan as he swings his arm to unleash a devastating wind spell. He drives his arm forward, sending a powerful crescent-shaped wind blade tearing through the air toward the beast. The glowing blue projectile streaks down the forest path, heading straight for its target. In a stunning display of agility, the horned rabbit uses its rock-hard ears to deflect the strike before landing gracefully on the ground. Turan realizes this is no ordinary beast, it is highly experienced in defending against ranged attacks. Digging its sharp claws deep into the dirt trail, the monster tenses its powerful hind legs. It launches high into the air, casting a massive, terrifying shadow over Turan on the path below. A chilling close-up captures the monster's glowing red eye locking onto its prey. In a split second, the beast completely vanishes, leaving behind only a gust of wind in the empty clearing. It charges forward at blinding speed, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. Anticipating the trajectory, Turan drops down from above right behind the confused beast, drawing a glowing dagger to strike. He plunges the blade deep into the monster's neck, forcing a painful, high-pitched shriek from the creature. Turan immediately kicks off its back, executing a clean backflip to distance himself safely. He lands smoothly on the dirt trail as the mortally wounded beast struggles to stay upright. Blinded by rage and pain, the horned rabbit crashes headfirst into a massive tree, snapping the trunk completely in half. The sheer force of the impact sends the giant rabbit tumbling violently across the forest floor. It slides through the undergrowth, tearing up dirt and shattering everything in its path. A massive plume of dust and debris rises high above the forest canopy. Turan stands calmly in the center of the clearing as the beast lets out its final, weak cries. Its hind leg twitches weakly as blood drips into the dirt. The horned rabbit finally collapses dead as a pool of blood forms under its head. Dark mana steam begins to rise from the corpse as its residual energy disperses. Turan walks over to the fallen beast to harvest his reward. He extends his hand over the corpse, beginning the absorption process. A massive torrent of glowing green mana erupts from the rabbit, flowing directly into Turan's body. Turan is shocked by the sheer volume of power. This density of mana is vastly different from the leopard monster he fought on his very first hunt. His eyes glow with intense energy as he realizes just how much stronger this single hunt has made him. Slumped against the tree, the dying subordinate witnesses the entire display, gasping as he realizes Turan is actually a powerful wizard. Turan calmly admits the truth, prompting the injured hunter to ask why he was hiding his true identity. Skipping the explanation, Turan asks if any of the 4 hunters have family left behind so he can deliver their belongings, to which the man, tears rolling down his blood-splattered face, whispers, "No." The dying hunter looks over at the lifeless body of Midden, crying out for his boss, one last time before slipping away. As they pass, Turan flashes back to a happier memory of Midden warmly smiling at the pub, telling him about a great nearby city named Orem and its massive library. In a nostalgic flashback at the pub, Midden tells Turan about a legendary library housing thousands of books, instantly catching Turan's curiosity. Midden teases him, noting how he finally looks interested the moment books are mentioned, while Turan tries his best to act unbothered. When Midden mentions the library is highly exclusive, Turan immediately asks how one gains entry. Midden reveals only wizards are allowed inside, leaving Turan resting his chin on his hand in deep thought. Back in the present, Turan stands in a misty forest clearing and quietly declares that he has made his decision. Standing before the 3 stone graves of Midden and his fallen crew, Turan announces his departure for the great city of Aurum. A close-up captures his solemn expression as he pays his final respects to Midden. Turan turns and walks away down the forest path, whispering a quiet hope that Midden finds peace. He soon arrives at a bustling, crowded city street filled with citizens beneath a bright blue sky. Taking in the grand scale of his surroundings, Turan admits to himself that he is almost embarrassed by how shocked he initially was by the much smaller city of Murray. The great city Aurum. An overhead view reveals the massive expanse of the great city Aurum, featuring organized city blocks, manicured gardens, and a colossal castle-like academy at its peak. Turan notes that he didn't expect so many travelers to be trying to enter the city at once. Carrying his heavy travel pack, he waits patiently in a massive queue leading up to the stone gates. Observing the armored guards, Turan wonders if they are actively screening the crowd for wanted criminals. He remains highly impressed, noting that a true metropolis like Aurum maintains a far superior security system. Suddenly, a guard barks halt, catching Turan completely off guard. The gate guard points out that Turan's clothes are filthy, ordering him to step aside and dust himself off before entering. Once inside, Turan beholds a colossal white stone tower wrapped in giant green vines that stretches straight into the clouds. Looking up from the stone pavement, Turan realizes this is the exact library Midden spoke of. He stares in absolute awe, overwhelmed by the structure's scale and concluding it could only be constructed through high-level magic. Turan approaches the grand, gold-trimmed blue double doors and calls out to the 2 guards posted at the entrance. When he explains that he is trying to enter, the brown-haired library guard blocks his path, reiterating that only wizards are permitted. Turan calmly replies, "I'm a wizard," leaving the guard completely stunned. The guard quickly flies into a rage, asking Turan if he wants to be executed for impersonating a wizard and calling him a lunatic. Insisting there is no way someone looking like Turan could be a wizard, the guard reaches out a gloved hand to forcefully push him away. As the guard's hand approaches, an ominous red mana aura begins to crackle intensely around Turan's chest. A brief memory of Kjorn echoes the fundamental logic of magic. Wizards instantly recognize one another by sensing mana flow, immediately knowing who holds the superior power. An extreme close-up shows Turan's eye glowing with a sharp, cold light. Turan unleashes a massive, terrifying burst of dark red mana pressure. The guard is left trembling in sweating terror, groaning as he is utterly crushed under the suffocating weight of Turan's power. Kenya lies collapsed on the stone floor, frantically reassuring Turan that he is fine when asked if he's all right. In a tight close-up, Kenya realizes Turan is no ordinary wizard and must belong to the noble class or higher. Rising to his feet, Kenya introduces himself as a knight of House Voltas and asks which noble house Turan represents. Turan asks if revealing his house is strictly necessary to enter, prompting a nervous no from Kenya. Kenya explains that actually using the library requires permission from the Master of Voltas, leaving Turan confused by the administrative hurdle. Kenya offers to contact House Voltas directly to handle the arrangements. Cut to Turan sitting naked in a steamy bath, letting out a heavy sigh as he yields to the process. A close-up of his eye reveals his internal annoyance, having originally expected the library entry process to be simple. A blonde maid from the estate nervously begins scrubbing him, her washcloth rubbing against his skin. She wipes down his arm with meticulous care. A wider shot of the luxurious indoor bathhouse shows multiple maids tending to Turan, who sits bewildered in the water, wondering how his day escalated to this. Turan tells them to stop, causing a blushing maid to frantically apologize. He asks if there's an issue with washing himself, but the maids explain that failing to attend to an esteemed guest results in severe punishment. Resigned, Turan tells them to do whatever they need to do. Outside, a scenic view showcases the colossal castle of House Voltas under a clear sky as the maids shout a collective "thank you." Inside the opulent estate, a maid clasps her hands together in absolute awe, whispering, "Wow, amazing." She gasps and covers her mouth in embarrassment as Turan notices her staring. Now fully dressed in a stylish, gold-trimmed black and white noble outfit, Turan ties his long white hair back and asks if there is something on his face. The head maid and her staff tremble with a blush, apologizing and admitting they lost themselves in his striking beauty. Turan gently smiles and assures them there's nothing to forgive, but the flustered head maid begs him not to speak so casually given the strict class difference. A tight shot captures Turan's eye reacting to approaching footsteps, wondering who is coming. Across the opulent hall, a young girl named Azella with long, curly pink hair walks confidently toward Turan and the staff. Accompanied by a towering, muscular bodyguard, Azella smugly asks if Turan is the guest who first showed up looking like a complete beggar. She gives a playful, mischievous smile, noting that after being cleaned up, he actually looks like a prince, while her bodyguard nervously cautions her against speaking to guests so brazenly. Turan politely introduces himself, prompting Azella to state her own name. When she asks what noble house he hails from, Turan replies that it is difficult to say due to personal reasons. Azella rests her hand on her chin with a sly grin, calling it a shame. She figures out he is hiding his identity and instantly decides to play a little prank on him. Without warning, a massive, explosive pillar of bright orange flame and mana erupts all around Azella, shaking the entire room. With a manic grin and glowing orange eyes, Azella stares down Turan, demanding that he show her. "Your mana." Turan is caught dead in the center of a massive, fiery storm of mana unleashed by the pink-haired noble girl, Azella. Refusing to be overwhelmed, Turan's eyes suddenly flare with a brilliant, star-shaped blue light as his own magic instinctively reacts. The two massive forces clash violently, creating a beautiful yet terrifying collision of orange fire and roaring blue wind right down the middle of the hall. The intense shockwave of their colliding powers forces Azella's bodyguard to shield the screaming maids as energy sweeps across the opulent room. Fortunately, the explosive pressure gradually settles, with both currents of mana slowly fading and dissipating toward the ceiling. Turan closes his eyes and lets out a massive, exhausted sigh of relief. Seeing that Turan easily held his own, a wide smirk spreads across Azella's face as she mutters a stunned "wow." She immediately bursts out laughing, raising her gloved hands in absolute delight. Azella walks up to Turan, who stands completely calm and composed in his new noble attire. With a highly mischievous grin, she drops a total bombshell, asking him out of nowhere, "Want to marry me?" The sudden proposal leaves Turan completely frozen, standing deadpan and speechless in absolute shock. Sweating bullets, the young mage is left entirely unable to even comprehend her bizarre question. Seeing his priceless reaction, Azella laughs hysterically and tells him it was only a joke, while her bodyguard nervously stands in the background. However, she gives him a charming look and tells him to think about it, teasingly noting that the seat next to her is currently wide open. Azella confidently struts out of the grand hall with her bodyguard, leaving the maids bowing behind her while Turan watches her depart. Turan is left standing in silence, staring after the eccentric noble girl with a very serious and thoughtful look on his face. He looks down, his gray eye narrowing as his focus shifts directly to his own hands. A close-up reveals that Turan's right hand is actually trembling and shaking uncontrollably from the brief clash. Looking at his shaking hand in sweat-drenched shock, Turan realizes that Azella's mana is easily on par with his own, leaving him wondering if this insane level of power is just normal in the city. The scene transitions to the majestic, golden crest of House Volta's hanging on the wall. Turan is escorted into a massive, opulent office where a powerful figure sits behind a grand wooden desk. The man introduces himself as Lord Rug Voltas, the Lord of Aurum, and welcomes the young noble to his study. Turan politely introduces himself, prompting Lord Rug Voltas to ask if his goal is indeed to use the city's famous library. The Lord warns him up front that despite the rumors, the library holds no legendary ancient magic or secret cheat codes to boost his mana. Turan calmly replies that he doesn't care about those things, which pleases Lord Rugvaltas, who notes that the library contains no house secrets anyway. Since it's getting late, the Lord kindly tells him to rest and return tomorrow, prompting a grateful Turan to thank him for his hospitality. We get a breathtaking view of the towering, vine-covered white library stretching high above the city under the morning sun. The next day, the library guards bow deeply to Turan at the entrance, officially welcoming him to the prestigious Sky Library. With a loud creak, the massive, gold-trimmed double doors slowly swing open. A close-up of Turan's eye shows him looking on in absolute, wide-eyed wonder. He looks up to find a jaw-dropping spiral staircase that winds endlessly upward into a glowing skylight at the top of the tower. Stepping inside, Turan beholds the colossal reading hall lined with massive, towering bookshelves and long study tables, completely awed by the sheer scale of the Sky Library. A mysterious figure's silhouette welcomes Turan to the library, greeting him warmly by name. The figure is revealed to be a tiny, energetic young girl with incredibly long black hair wearing an oversized white robe, who happily waves her arm and introduces herself as the library's primary librarian. A close-up shows her explaining that, by order of the Lord, she is going to lay down the rules for using the facility. She confidently states that the rules are very simple. Turan stands completely deadpan, sweating as he realizes a literal child is in charge of this massive place. The rules are laid out: first, if you damage anything, you must pay for it. Second, taking books outside is strictly forbidden. The librarian suddenly steps forward and pokes Turan in the chest, declaring she will be watching him the entire time. A flustered Turan politely asks if she can stand a little farther away while he reads because she is making him uncomfortable. From an overhead view of the Grand Hall, Turan asks if she has actually read the books here herself, to which she boasts that finding exactly what a reader needs is what she does best. Walking down the massive aisles, she asks what kind of book he is looking for, offering genres like romance or history. She points a finger and smugly asks if he wants something erotic since he is young, leaving a sweating Turan staring back in completely silent disbelief. A close-up of the librarian shows her tilting her head in curiosity as Turan explains his actual goal. He just wants to learn basic common sense about the world. With a loud, echoing slam, a massive stack of thick, heavy books is dropped onto the reading table. She explains that since many of the books in the main library are hundreds of years old, they might not fit his daily needs, but this specific pile should help, to which Turan politely thanks her, receiving a cheerful "you're welcome" in return. Turan pulls up a chair and prepares to open his very first book. Holding the brown leather-bound cover decorated with ancient golden runes, Turan marvels at his first real book. A close-up of his hands shows him flipping through the pages, which are filled with handwritten texts, maps, and detailed astronomical charts. An extreme close-up of Turan's eye reflects the wonder of the knowledge in front of him. Looking down at the pages with a soft, genuinely happy smile, Turan whispers that it is absolutely amazing. An overhead shot shows Turan repeating the exact same routine day after day, sitting entirely alone at a massive table covered in stacks of open books. Through his intense studying, Turan begins to understand the world's geography, different fantasy races like fairies and green-skinned goblins, wizard etiquette, and how various items are processed. He even reads up on dangerous monsters and powerful, highly advanced relics left behind from the era of the Old Empire, including a strangely modern motorcycle helmet. Later, the scene cuts to Lord Rugvaltas sitting behind his grand office desk, noting that Turan has been making excellent use of his library access. Standing before the desk, Turan listens as the Lord explains that, separate from treating him as a noble, allowing him to use the library was a massive act of personal goodwill. Understanding the hidden implication, Turan asks Lord Rugvaltas to name his price for that goodwill. The Lord reveals that a dangerous monster has appeared north of Aurum and has been attacking travelers. Turan asks if he wants him to hunt it, prompting the Lord to reveal a grim detail. 4 skilled knights were already sent to defeat the beast, but none returned because they were eaten. Rubbing his forehead in deep stress, Lord Rugvaltas explains that a noble must step in personally, but his house can only mobilize 2 people at the moment, so he desperately needs Turan's strength. Turan confidently accepts the task, stating that protecting people is exactly what a wizard is supposed to do. Lord Rugvaltas explains that the blocked northern route is an essential trade route for Aurum and must be cleared quickly, noting it has already been blocked for 10 days. A close-up of Turan shows a knowing, clever smirk on his face. He realizes that the road was blocked 10 days ago, long before he even set foot in Aurum. The cunning lord had this dangerous monster hunt planned for him from the very moment he first granted I am entry to the library. Heavy leather boots step firmly onto the stone pathway. A heavy, solemn march begins as a full company of knights streams out from the grand, towering gates of the great city Aurum. Stretching her gloved hands to warm up, Azella scoffs internally. Her father, Lord Rugvaltas, is making a massive fuss, mobilizing an outside guest like Turan for a simple monster hunt as if his own unit were completely unreliable. Turning to her companions, Azella quickly clarifies she isn't blaming Turan, but when the kind-faced young man beside him smiles and questions if calling the Lord fussy isn't a bit much, Azella instantly snaps at him to drop it. Left comically trembling under her glare, the young man recovers and turns to introduce himself politely, Marvin Valtas. Turan gives a calm nod in return. Deep in the woods, a boot kicks through the muddy trail. Azella struts ahead, eager to wrap this up quickly and head back to rest, with Turan and Marvin following closely behind. Leaning in, Marvin suddenly breaks the silence with an unexpected question, asking Turan if he happens to be interested in his big sister. Turan doesn't hesitate for a single second. Pardon, no. Marvin lets out a massive sigh of pure relief, but before the awkwardness can settle. Stop. The entire squad halts, their expressions instantly hardening. Blocking the forest clearing ahead lies the shattered, splintered wreckage of a wooden wagon. Inspecting the ruins, the armored knights deduce that peddlers ignored the warnings, traveled south from the northern border, and were ambushed along the road. Turan steps forward, studying the debris. Embedded directly into a broken wooden plank is a massive, dark, muddy 5-fingered handprint. The knight inspects the print and plainly concludes it was a monkey. Turan looks up in sheer disbelief, repeating the claim while Azella stares back in complete, baffled silence. The knight explains that the beast likely retreated back into the woods after the attack, meaning they'll need to find its trail to hunt it down. Azella winces, admitting her tracking magic is practically useless before turning to Marvin, but Marvin just sighs. He can't do it either, leaving them to wonder if any of their knights possess the skill. Crouching down, Turan picks up a torn piece of white cloth from the wreckage. I'll try looking. Azella's eyes widen in shock, asking if he belongs to the legendary Zahar bloodline. Turan simply replies that he's well accustomed to using this spell. Closing his eyes, Turan focuses his mind. His eyes snap open, burning with a sharp flash of mana. A brilliant, mystical blue stream of tracking magic surges forth, sweeping through the dense canopy to illuminate the hidden path of the beast. Pointing into the thicket, Turan leads the way, this way. The glowing trail guides the group directly to a rushing forest river where the magic suddenly dissipates. The beast was clever, washing itself in the current to completely erase its scent. Azella stares in utter disbelief, questioning if a mere beast could truly wash itself in the river just to avoid being tracked. Standing with his back turned, Turan dryly offers another theory. Perhaps the creature simply wanted to take a bath. Suddenly, Turan's eyes narrow as he sniffs the air, detecting a sharp and dangerous shift in the wind. Whipping his head back toward Azella and Marvin Valtas, he screams a desperate warning, "Behind you!" A massive, yellow-maned black monkey monster erupts from the dense canopy with a blood-curdling screech, leaping downward to bring its colossal fist crashing toward the squad. The lead bearded knight yells for his men to dodge, but it's too late. The beast's fist slams violently into the dirt, unleashing a massive shockwave that hurls the knights backward in a flurry of blood and debris. Relying on his quick reflexes, Turan leaps gracefully back, escaping the blast radius to land smoothly on his feet with a calm, focused glare. The scene turns grim as a fallen knight coughs up blood, his eyes rolling back. She and the kind-looking man used Knight as a shield and tossed them aside like they are nothing. Watching the horrific scene unfold, Tyran beads with sweat as he grimly recalls his mother's warnings, whispering under his breath, "Mother wasn't wrong." Shaking off her shock, Azella fiercely rallies the remaining troops, screaming, "Attack!" The surviving knights charge forward to engage the massive beast. Screeching loudly, the clever monster turns tail to flee deep into the woods, sending the knights into a frenzy to give chase. Knowing the creature cannot be allowed to escape, Tyran raises his sling, rapidly spinning a stone overhead. The monkey monster sprints through the forest at blinding speed. Struggling to keep up, Azella and Marvin shout in frustration as the beast slips out of sight. Taking a deep breath, Tyran locks his eyes onto the fleeing target and releases the shot. The stone whizzes past Azella's face as a brilliant, high-speed blue laser beam, leaving her completely stunned. The mana-infused projectile strikes the running monster dead center, triggering a massive, violent explosion. Halting in their tracks, Marvin and Azella turn around, staring at the raw power of the blast in absolute, sweating awe. Through the swirling dust walks Tyran, looking effortlessly cool and composed as the wind blows through his white hair.